Welcome back from the break. We're on the home stretch now. Moving into our last session of presentations, our first presentation is an overview of the CREATES Act and covered product authorizations. Our presenter is Sharon Coleman, who's a Senior Regulatory Counsel and FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research's also regulatory policy. She advises the agency and center leadership on policy matters relating to the regulation of human drugs under the Federal Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, including new and generic drug approvals, OTC monograph products, and more. She also drafts regulations, guidance documents, and citizens' petitions responses, and provides technical assistance for legislators on draft legislation. Next, we'll present on considerations for the application pathway 505(b)(2) or ANDA. We welcome back Dave Coppersmith for this presentation. This presentation will help potential applicants understand the different application approval pathways and determine the best fit for their particular drug product, and to understand the differences between 505(b)(2) and the ANDA application pathways. Our third presentation is on resources available on the Orange Book website. Our presenter, Dr. Trung Quoc, is a pharmacist in the OGD Division of Orange Book Publication and Regulatory Assessment and has been with the FDA since 2014. As an Orange Book pharmacist, he helps the Orange Book publication by identifying drug products approved on the basis of safety and effectiveness by the FDA and related patent and exclusivity information. Our fourth presentation is on the global generic drug supply chain and need for international dialogue. Our presenter, Dr. Sarah Ibrahim, is an Associate Director in the OGD's Generic Drug Global Affairs. In this role, Dr. Ibrahim develops strategies to address identified and emerging regulatory challenges in relation to the international nature of the generic drug industry. In collaboration with other CDER and FDA offices, she supports stakeholder engagement concerning issues related to globalization of the generic pharmaceutical supply and harmonization of regulatory approaches for generic drugs. Dr. Ibrahim started her career at FDA in 2014 as a scientific reviewer in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. Our final presentation is on quality management maturity. Our presenter, Dr. Jamila Harawaka, is a senior scientific advisor in the Office of Quality Surveillance in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality in the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. In her current role, she provides scientific and technical advice and consultation regarding program matters and complex issues related to pharmaceutical quality surveillance. Jamila also served as a microbiologist in CDER's Office of Compliance, where she assessed the compliance status of compounding facilities and performed high-priority inspections. In addition to her routine work, she also led the development of technical training courses delivered through the Compounding Quality Center of Excellence, including the courses on environmental monitoring and aseptic process simulations. Please join me in welcoming our first presenter, Sharon Coleman.
Hi there, my name is Sharon Coleman. I'm in CDER's Office of Regulatory Policy, and I'm going to provide an overview of the CREATES Act, which is an important law for generic developers to be aware of, and covered product authorizations under that law. So just in terms of learning objectives today, the goal is to understand what the CREATES Act is, why it was passed, and how it works, and to learn how to obtain a covered product authorization under CREATES from FDA if you need one. Just a quick sort of housekeeping note that while this presentation is focused on the generic industry, because this forum is focused on the generic industry, the pathway established in the CREATES Act is actually available not just for generic developers, but for folks seeking to submit 505(b)(2) and biosimilar applications as well. So why was CREATES passed? What problem was it trying to solve? Some of you may have heard of this problem, others may not. CREATES was passed to, the provisions of CREATES, at least that we're going to be talking about today, were passed to try to solve what people would refer to as the samples access problem, or the RLD access problem. And just kind of in a nutshell, the samples access problem is a problem that arose because, as you know, to get approval for a generic drug, the generic company needs to show that their version of the product is bioequivalent to the brand drug. And this usually requires the generic company to do BE studies comparing their product to the RLD. But to do those studies, they need to get access to a small quantity of the RLD. Now, typically, generic companies are able to get those RLD supplies through normal drug distribution channels, i.e. via wholesalers, via pharmacies, etc. But sometimes they can't, because the products are under a limited distribution program. And those distribution limitations can be imposed either voluntarily by the brand company, like, so for example, let's say that the brand company sells their product only through specialty pharmacies. So that's one kind of distribution limitation that's imposed voluntarily by the brand company. Another kind of distribution limitation arises in connection with the FDA's risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, or REMS programs with elements to assure safe use, or ATASU. So once those distribution limitations are in place and now the product is being marketed in a smaller, more controlled network, and the generic comes around asking for samples so that they can do their competing development work, there were reports prior to the passage of CREATES that some brands were arguing that they couldn't sell products to their generic competitors because the REMS prohibited them from doing so, or that they just had no obligation to sell the samples of the RLD to the generic company. Or we would hear that they would sort of theoretically say yes to selling the product, but actually impose conditions on the sale of the product that generic companies argued were difficult or impossible to comply with, like levels of liability insurance that weren't workable, etc. And if the generic companies would go and seek samples from wholesalers or other third parties, we would hear reports that the brand companies or some brand companies would place restrictions in their contracts with those third parties that limited their ability to sell the RLD to their competitors. And the upshot of all of that is that these protracted or failed efforts to get access to brand samples slowed down or prevented entirely, or at least deterred, generic development of these limited distribution products. So the CREATES Act comes along trying to fix that. And the CREATE stands for Creating and Restoring Equal Access to Equivalent Samples. And just a little bit of trivia is that the law that was ultimately passed actually didn't have this title in the text of the law. So as a technical matter, it's not called CREATES, but everybody refers to it as CREATES anyway, because this was the name of many of the predecessor drafts before CREATES was actually passed. So we all sort of refer to the law as CREATES. Anyway, just a little bit of legislative history trivia. So CREATES is a private right of action. That means that it creates an ability for product developers to sue brand companies that don't provide them access to samples on the terms set forth in the statute. And the statute is very specific. It sets forth a number of steps that the brand and generic company have to follow in the transaction for samples. And then it provides for injunctive relief ordering the sample sale if all those steps are followed. And it provides for attorney's fees for the generic company, and it provides for a high monetary award that's designed to deter withholding of samples in cases where the brand company delays providing access to product unjustifiably. And before I get even deeper into CREATES, I just want to flag that there's no need to remember everything that I'm saying about the CREATES Act. FDA has a web page that provides information on this statute. So we've got background information on the CREATES Act. We've got a link to the full text of the law, which is really key if you plan to use it. And we have a link to FDA guidance on how to get a covered product under CREATES, which I'll circle back to a little bit later in the presentation. So please don't feel pressure to remember everything that I'm saying. There are resources on the FDA website relating to CREATES that you can refer to. Okay, so with that, let's get back to the civil action. The private action that Create sets forth allows eligible product developers, so the generic, to bring suit in an appropriate U.S. district court alleging that the license holder, i.e. the brand company, has declined to provide them with sufficient quantities of the covered product on commercially reasonable, market-based terms. So what do all these terms mean? The effective functioning of Creates depends on how each one of these terms is defined. So eligible product developer and license holder are pretty straightforward. The eligible product developer is basically the interested generic developer or the person seeking to develop a B2 or biosimilar, as the case may be. And the license holder is typically the brand company. Though, for example, if FDA has designated an ANDA as the reference standard for a particular product, the license holder could be a generic company. And the covered product is just the universe of product that has to be provided under the statute. So it basically includes any drug or biological product or combination of them, devices intended for use with drugs or biological products, etc. It's worth noting that it doesn't include drugs on the shortage list unless they've been there for 6 months or unless FDA concludes that it's starting to look like getting another version of the product on the market will help alleviate a shortage. I want to call your attention to the sufficient quantities definition. Because the statute defines sufficient quantities as an amount of a covered product that the developer determines allows it to conduct the testing or fulfill the regulatory requirements to support its application. So this is a determination of amount that the generic company makes. It's not a discussion between the brand and the generic or a negotiation. It's not a determination that the brand company makes. This determination is clearly made by the developer in Creates. And then finally, commercially reasonable market-based terms. Could mean a lot of things. Under Creates, commercially reasonable market-based terms has 3 requirements. The first is that the price for the sale of the samples has to be at or below the most recent wholesale acquisition cost for the drug. The second is that the product has to be provided on a schedule consistent with the timing that the statute sets out, which we'll see in a minute. And finally, and this is really important, no additional conditions can be imposed on the sale of the covered product. And this is designed to address that problem that we talked about a little bit earlier on, where we were finding that some brand companies were imposing terms on the sale that generic companies were finding impossible to comply with. So this feature of Creates is designed to prevent that problem. Okay, so then what is it that the generic actually has to prove? They have to prove that they submitted a written request to the brand company to purchase sufficient quantities of the covered product and that the request was sent to a named corporate officer of the brand company, that it was made by certified or registered mail with return receipt requested, that it specified a point of contact in the generic company and a means for written and electronic communication with them, and that it provided a delivery address for samples. Now, this is really in the weeds. Like, we're going to find out in a few slides why it is that the law is so concerned about exactly how these communications are conducted. And the last thing that the generic company has to prove is that the brand did not deliver sufficient quantities on commercially reasonable market-based terms within 31 days of getting the request, if it's a non-REMS ETASU product, or within 31 days of receiving either the request or the CPA, whichever is later, for REMS ETASU products. So what is the covered product authorization? As I mentioned, it's required if you want to use the Creates pathway for a REMS ETASU product. You have to get it from the FDA. The FDA will respond to you within 120 days. And the covered product authorization basically says that the FDA has determined that your study will provide safety protections comparable to those that are in the REMS for the brand company that you're seeking. And as I mentioned, we'll circle back to this later. Okay, so let's say that the generic company is able to prove all those things I just said it needs to prove. Does that mean that the brand company has to provide them with samples? And the answer is no, not in all cases. There are 3 affirmative defenses in the statute, and if the brand can prove any of those 3, they are not liable under the statute. So this is a little preview of what the affirmative defenses are, and I'll show you each one of them in a little more detail. So the first affirmative defense is that on the date the request was made, the brand company and its agents, wholesalers and distributors were not engaged in the manufacturing or commercial marketing of the product. And not only that, but they didn't have access to inventory of the covered product that would allow them to supply it to the generic company on commercially reasonable market-based terms. The second affirmative defense is that they sell the covered product through third parties and they haven't placed any either explicit or implicit restrictions on those third parties' ability to sell covered product to the generic company, and the covered product can be freely purchased by the generic in sufficient quantities on commercially reasonable market-based terms from those third parties. And the final affirmative defense, and this is really important for generic developers to focus on, is that the generic company did not respond to correspondence in time. And this is where we get into the timing requirements that the statute sets out. The brand company can prove that it made an offer to the specified person via the specified method to sell sufficient quantities on commercially reasonable market-based terms within the time frame that it had to. So if it was a non-REMS Itasu product, they provided an offer within 14 days of getting their request, and the generic did not respond within 7 days. Or for a REMS Itasu product, they provided an offer within 20 days of receiving the request or the CPA, and the generic didn't respond within 10 days. And now we see why the statute was so specific about how these correspondences are transmitted specifically. The sponsors of this legislation did not want to see communications getting lost in a mailroom or routed to the wrong person, and to have that be an avenue for gaming under the law. So the fact that it has these correspondences have to go to a named corporate officer, that they have to be sent by registered mail, etc., all of that is to make sure that these timelines can actually be achieved. And this is what the timelines look like visually. I just wanted to provide the sort of visual representation because it can be sort of hard to keep that whole calendar in your head. So basically, for a non-REMS Itasu product, the generic sends the written request for samples. The brand has to respond to that request within 14 days with an offer. The generic has to respond to that within 7 days, and then the brand has to provide samples within 31 days of the original request. For REMS Itasu product, there's a little bit of an additional step. The generic has to get a covered product authorization from the FDA. The FDA has 120 days to grant it, or to respond, and if it's granted, the generic company will send the CPA to the brand company with a request for samples. The brand company gets 20 days to respond with an offer. The generic gets 10 days to respond to that, and the brand company has to provide samples within 31 days of the original request or CPA receipt. So that's the CRADES process. Let's say that somebody gets all the way through it and the generic prevails in the civil action. The court will order the brand company to provide the generic with sufficient quantities of covered product without delay on commercially reasonable market-based terms, and award the generic company reasonable attorney's fees and costs of the civil action, and award to the generic a monetary amount sufficient to deter the brand company from failing to provide product if the court finds that the brand delayed providing product without a legitimate business justification. And that monetary amount is high, as I mentioned. It's capped at the revenues earned on a product during the period of liability. So between 31 days after they got the request or the CPA and when they ultimately provide samples to the generic. And because so much money is at stake with each sort of passing day or month of samples not being handed over, the court can actually order the brand company to sell the samples to the generic without delay before the court has gotten to the question of the availability or the level of a monetary award. Okay, so that's the CREATES Act. You now know everything that I know. So now that we understand what the CREATES Act is and how it works, I just want to circle back to this process for getting covered product authorizations. As you see on the slide, this is kind of the beginning of the process of getting samples for a REMS Itasu product. And as I mentioned, we've issued guidance on it, and you want to check the guidance out if you want to submit a CPA request to FDA. And really importantly, CPAs are only for REMS Itasu products. To prevail in the private right of action established by CREATES, a developer seeking samples of a non-REMS Itasu product does not need to get a CPA. So before you submit a request for a CPA, please check FDA's online listing of REMS to see if the product is subject to a REMS with Itasu. If you do want to submit a request for a CPA for generic products, please submit the CPA request as a controlled correspondence to the CDER NextGen collaboration portal and prominently identify it as a request for a covered product authorization. If you're submitting a CPA request for samples that you plan to use in human clinical trials, please include with the request your study protocols, your informed consent documents, and your informational materials for testing that show that safety protections comparable to those in the REMS, excuse me, for the brand product, will be provided in the studies. If you're looking for a CPA for development that does not involve human clinical trials, your request for a CPA should clearly state that the samples will not be used for testing in humans. And if you receive a CPA for testing that doesn't involve humans, and your development plan changes such that you need samples for human clinical trials, you're going to want to obtain a new CPA for those purposes. Just to be aware, as we process your request, we may ask for additional information via an information request. And if we determine that the materials that you've submitted show that they have safety protections comparable to those provided by the applicable REMS with ATASU, we will issue a CPA to you within 120 days of the date of your request. But if we can't determine from the materials you've submitted that those safety protections will be provided and the deficiencies are more significant than can be resolved via an information request, your CPA request will be rejected. And we intend to process any resubmission of your CPA request on a new 120-day clock. And just a final note, as I mentioned, if you seek a CPA for a product on the drug shortage list, in effect under 506E, please specify in your request that the product you're looking for is on the drug shortage list. And check out the FDA guidance on how to obtain a CPA because it provides some additional information that's relevant to people that are seeking CPAs for products that are on the drug shortage list. Okay, so that's everything I have to say about the CREATES Act and covered product authorizations. I wanted to give you a quick challenge question. To see how we did. I know that was an incredibly dense presentation and a lot to remember, but let's say the generic company X wants to obtain samples of a covered product. They submit a request for a covered product authorization to FDA. They include in their request study protocols, informed consent documents, and informational materials for testing. Will they receive a CPA? Okay, and the answer is it depends. First of all, is the product subject to a REMS with ATASU? Because if not, we didn't need to submit a request for a CPA, and we won't get a CPA. Number two, did the materials that they submitted, and they submitted the right materials, but did those materials show that safety protections comparable to those in the REMS for the RLD will be provided? And finally, did they adequately address any information requests from FDA? Okay, so great job, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to leave you with this CREATES Act resources page just as a reminder that it's there for you if you need it. And thank you so very much for having me.
Hello, my name is Dave Coppersmith. I'm a regulatory counsel in the Division of Policy Development in the Office of Generic Drug Policy. And my presentation today is focused on considerations for the appropriate abbreviated approval pathway, either Section 505B2 or Section 505J. I will start by giving a brief overview of the applications under Section 505 of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. I will then review some of the regulatory and scientific considerations for determining the appropriate abbreviated approval pathway. And I'll then wrap up by discussing how prospective applicants can request assistance from FDA in determining the appropriate abbreviated approval pathway. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act describes different routes for obtaining approval of two broad categories of drug applications: new drug applications, or NDAs, and abbreviated new drug applications, ANDAs, or ANDAs. NDAs and ANDAs can be divided into the following four categories: standalone NDAs, 505B2 NDAs, ANDAs, and petition ANDAs. and we'll look at each of these categories in more detail in the coming slides, focusing in particular on 505(b)(2) NDAs, ANDAs, and also petition ANDAs. Standalone NDAs are submitted under Section 505(b)(1) of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and approved under Section 505(c). An NDA must contain, among other things, a demonstration of the safety and the effectiveness of the drug for the conditions of use for which approval is sought. They contain full reports of investigations of safety and effectiveness, and all data necessary for approval was developed by or for the sponsor, or for which the sponsor has a right of reference. 505(b)(2) NDAs are submitted pursuant to Section 505(b)(2), as their name implies, and approved under Section 505(c). As with standalone NDAs, they contain full reports of investigations of safety and effectiveness, but at least some of the information required for approval comes from studies not conducted by or for the applicant, and for which the applicant has not obtained a right of reference or use, which can include published literature, clinical data produced by other entities, or an agency, safety, and/or effectiveness finding for another drug. A 505(b)(2) applicant is expected to establish a bridge, for example by using comparative bioavailability data between the proposed drug product and each listed drug that the applicant seeks to rely upon to demonstrate that such reliance is scientifically justified. 505(b)(2s leverage existing knowledge. And their approval, like a 505(j) application, may be delayed because of patent or exclusivity rights that apply to the listed drug. ANDAs are submitted and approved under Section 505(j) of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. ANDA applicants are not required to provide independent evidence of the safety and effectiveness of the proposed generic drug. Instead, an ANDA is a duplicate of a previously approved drug, the reference listed drug, or RLD, that relies on FDA's finding that the RLD is safe and effective. ANDAs must demonstrate sameness to the RLD with respect to active ingredients, dosage form, route of administration, strength, previously approved conditions of use, and labeling, with certain exceptions. ANDAs must also include sufficient information to demonstrate bioequivalence to the RLD, and they may contain certain differences from an RLD, for example, a change approved in response to a suitability petition, which I'll discuss in a few slides, or other permissible differences, such as certain differences in inactive ingredients, labeling, or container closure systems, as long as investigations are not necessary to establish safety and effectiveness. With respect to active ingredient sameness, Section 505(j) generally requires that a proposed generic drug product demonstrate that it is the same as the RLD with respect to active ingredients. And active ingredients is defined in the regulations as any component intended to furnish pharmacological activity or other direct effect in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, or to affect the structure or any function of the body of man. ANDA product labeling generally must be the same as the labeling approved for the RLD. There are certain exceptions, such as changes required because of differences approved pursuant to a suitability petition, omissions of an indication or other aspect of labeling that is protected by patent or exclusivity, or differences because the generic and RLD are produced or distributed by different manufacturers. And as I mentioned earlier, ANDAs must include sufficient information to demonstrate bioequivalence to the RLD. A drug is considered to be bioequivalent to a listed drug if the rate and extent of absorption of the drug do not show a significant difference from that of the listed drug. The regulations state that bioequivalence may be demonstrated with in vivo or in vitro data, or both. And 21 CFR 320.24b lists the in vivo and in vitro approaches in descending order of accuracy, sensitivity, and reproducibility applicable for determining bioequivalence of a drug product. Moving on now to petition ANDAs. A suitability petition is a request to submit an ANDA for a drug that differs from the RLD in its route of administration, dosage form, or strength, or that has one different active ingredient and a fixed combination drug product. A suitability petition must be submitted and approved before an ANDA citing that petition can be submitted. An ANDA citing a suitability petition that is pending or has been denied will not be received for review because the application lacks a legal basis for submission. When a suitability petition is submitted to FDA, it is reviewed per the process outlined in the Manual of Policies and Procedures 5240.5 and a suitability petitions, and it's approved unless FDA identifies a reason under 21 CFR 314.93 E1 not to approve. One thing to note is that the process outlined in the current version of MAP 5240.5 will be updated as appropriate to reflect certain agreed upon enhancements starting in year 2 of GDUFA III. Once a suitability petition is approved, an ANDA with that change can be submitted, and petition ANDAs are submitted under Section 505 J2C of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. In determining which abbreviated approval pathway is appropriate, there are many considerations. These include regulatory considerations, such as whether the proposed product is a duplicate of the listed drug, whether the differences between the proposed generic drug product are the subject of an approved suitability petition, and also bundling. There are also scientific considerations, such as whether the limited confirmatory studies are acceptable for an ANDA or ANDA, active ingredient sameness evaluation, and intentional differences between the proposed product and the RLD. And we'll look at each of these considerations in more detail in the coming slides. FDA will refuse to file a 505(b)(2) application for a drug that is a duplicate of a listed drug and eligible for approval under 505J. Sometimes whether a proposed drug product can be submitted as a 505(b)(2) comes down to an issue of timing. If FDA approves a pharmaceutical equivalent to a proposed product before a 505(b)(2) application is submitted, such that the proposed product would be a duplicate of that pharmaceutically equivalent drug product and eligible for approval under 505J, FDA will refuse to file the application as a 505(b)(2) application. However, if FDA approves a duplicate drug product after a 505(b)(2) application is submitted, but before the 505(b)(2) application is approved, that application would remain eligible for approval as a 505(b)(2) application, and FDA would not require the applicant of the pending 505(b)(2) application to withdraw the application and submit an ANDA. As I discussed earlier, certain differences between an RLD and a proposed generic drug product may be permitted in an ANDA if these differences are the subject of an approved suitability petition. FDA will approve a suitability petition unless, among other things, the safety and effectiveness of the proposed change cannot be adequately evaluated without data from investigations that exceed what may be required for an ANDA, or the petition is for a drug product for which a pharmaceutical equivalent has been approved in an NDA, including a 505(b)(2) application. Once an NDA for a drug product that is a pharmaceutical equivalent to the drug described in the suitability petition is approved, the suitability petition and the listed drug described in the petition may no longer be the basis for ANDA submission. In that case, an applicant with a pending ANDA would be required to submit a new ANDA that both identifies the pharmaceutical equivalent product as the RLD and complies with applicable regulatory requirements. An applicant seeking approval for multiple drug products containing the same active ingredients, when some of these products would qualify for approval under 505J and some would qualify for approval under 505(b)(2, the applicant may submit one 505(b)(2) application for all such drug products. The applicant would not have to submit an ANDA for the drug products that qualify for approval under 505J and a 505(b)(2) application for the drug products that qualify for approval under Section 505(b)(2. The applicant could bundle everything together in a 505(b)(2) application. So those are the regulatory considerations that I wanted to discuss today in determining whether a proposed product should utilize the ANDA pathway or the 505(b)(2) pathway. We'll now move on to the scientific considerations. And we'll start with limited confirmatory studies. So both ANDAs and 505(b)(2) applications may include additional information to support approval. Both applicants have flexibility in the types of studies, data, and information they may submit in their respective application. For 505(b)(2s, the types of studies may include clinical investigations to establish the safety and/or effectiveness of a product. For ANDAs, limited confirmatory clinical studies may be acceptable if the purpose is not to establish safety and effectiveness. For example, FDA has previously accepted limited confirmatory studies appropriate for petition ANDAs, and FDA has reviewed pharmacodynamic data in determining active ingredient sameness. If the safety and effectiveness must be established by investigations, these investigations go beyond the scope of a limited confirmatory study that may be submitted in an ANDA. And in the case where the studies go outside the scope of the ANDA pathway, applicants should contact the Office of Generic Drugs, or OGD, prior to submission of an application to inform which type of application is appropriate. Another scientific consideration is the active ingredient sameness evaluation. Generally, a proposed generic drug product must demonstrate that it is the same as the RLD with respect to the active ingredients. FDA has broad discretion to determine whether an ANDA contains information sufficient to conclude that the proposed drug's active ingredient is the same as the active ingredient in the RLD. If the active ingredient cannot be demonstrated to be the same as the active ingredient in the RLD by using information and data that may be submitted in an ANDA, the proposed drug product should not be submitted for approval in an ANDA. And as we just discussed on the previous slide, generally the active ingredient in a proposed ANDA must be the same as the active ingredients in the RLD. Certain differences in inactive ingredients are permissible. An ANDA must include information regarding the identity and quantity of all active and inactive ingredients, a characterization of any permitted differences between the formulations of the proposed drug product and their RLD, and a justification demonstrating that the safety and effectiveness is not adversely affected by these differences. Please note that for some products, for certain routes of administration, the types of changes to inactive ingredients that are permissible in an ANDA have been limited by regulation. Applicants can consider a 505(b)(2) application if the proposed drug product contains changes to its formulation that are not permissible in an ANDA. For example, a proposed parenteral drug product that contains an additional inactive ingredient not present in the RLD that cannot be considered an exception excipient, or a proposed drug product that contains a novel excipient that requires clinical testing to establish safety. ANDA applicants should consider both the ANDA regulatory requirements for formulations applicable to specific routes of administration and the data that would be scientifically necessary to support any permissible differences in active ingredients between the proposed product and the RLD. And if you have questions about permissible differences in formulation, you should contact OGD prior to submission of the application. As I mentioned earlier, an ANDA must contain information to show that the proposed drug product is bioequivalent to the RLD. A 505(b)(2) application is not appropriate for a drug product that should have been submitted as an ANDA but failed to meet all of the 505(j) standards. For example, FDA will refuse to file a 505(b)(2) application if the proposed drug product is a duplicate of a listed drug but is unintentionally less bioavailable and fails to demonstrate bioequivalence to the listed drug. An ANDA must include a statement that the conditions of use prescribed, recommended, or suggested in the labeling have been previously approved for the RLD. If changes to a proposed generic drug product are such that the labeling of that drug product does not reflect the previously approved conditions of use, the application cannot be approved as an ANDA. However, FDA will not refuse to approve an ANDA whose labeling excludes or carves out conditions of use approved for the RLD that may be omitted from the proposed ANDA labeling because of patents or exclusivities. An ANDA must contain information to show that labeling proposed is the same as the labeling approved for the RLD. However, certain differences in labeling between generic products and RLDs may be appropriate due to different manufacturers, for example, the expiration date or formulation. An ANDA is not appropriate if the proposed drug product would have a new indication or a new dosing regimen as compared to the RLD, or if the differences between the products are such they would require investigations to establish the safety or effectiveness of the proposed product, or necessitate such significant labeling differences that the labeling no longer satisfies the same labeling requirement. And in those cases, applicants can consider submitting a 505(b)(2) application. So that wraps up the different regulatory and scientific considerations that I wanted to discuss today. When applicants have questions about which pathway may be appropriate, they can request assistance from FDA. If an applicant is developing a drug product intended to have the same active ingredient, conditions of use, route of administration, dosage form, strength, and with certain permissible differences labeling as an RLD, and is proposing a non-clinical study program and has questions about whether the proposed drug product qualifies as an ANDA, the applicant should contact the Office of Generic Drugs. Applicants can submit controlled correspondence or request a pre-ANDA meeting as appropriate. Which one the applicant uses to communicate with the agency will depend on the questions that the applicant has, as well as the product, either complex or non-complex. In the guidances for industry, controlled correspondence related to generic drug development, and formal meetings between FDA and ANDA applicants of complex products, which discusses the pre-ANDA meetings, provide information to applicants on these different pathways to communicate with the agency, and are also listed on the resources slide at the end of this presentation. If an applicant is developing a drug product that has a different active ingredient, conditions of use, route of administration, dosage form, strength, or labeling than a listed drug, and is proposing a clinical program, and has questions about submission through the 505(b)(2) pathway, the applicant should contact the Office of New Drugs. Applicants can contact the appropriate O&D review division and consider requesting a GDUFA meeting. That brings us to our first challenge question. A suitability petition must be submitted and approved before an ANDA citing that petition can be submitted. True or false? And the answer is true. An ANDA citing a suitability petition that is pending or has been denied will not be received for review because the application lacks a legal basis for submission. And now for our second challenge question. For a 505(b)(2) application, which of the following is true? It contains full reports of investigations of safety and effectiveness. Its approval may be delayed by patents or exclusivities. It's a duplicate of a previously approved drug, or both A and B are true. So the correct answer is D. Both A and B are true. As we've discussed, 505(b)(2) applications contain full reports of investigations of safety and effectiveness, and their approval may be delayed by patents or exclusivities. They are not duplicates of a previously approved drug. As we've discussed, that would be an ANDA. As we have discussed, there are resources available to applicants. There's the guidance for industry, determining whether to submit an ANDA or a 505(b)(2) application, and that guidance provides information on how applicants can communicate with the agency if they have questions. It also discusses the different regulatory and scientific considerations that we've talked about today. There's the two guidances for industry, the formal meetings between FDA and ANDA applicants of a complex products under GDUFA, and the draft guidance for industry, controlled correspondence related to generic drug development. There's also FDA's Enhanced Communication webpage, which contains contact information for the O&D review divisions. And as I mentioned, there's also MAP 5240.5 and a suitability petitions, which is available on the CDER MAP webpage. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction. Today, I will be showing you why the Orange Book website is a great resource for Orange Book-related information. I would like to briefly talk to you about the Orange Book overview, how to navigate the Orange Book website, and talk about the Orange Book information and resource links. The Orange Book is a list of drug products that are safe and effective and approved under Sections 505C and 505J 7A of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. It also contains information on which drug products can be substituted for another. As you may know, throughout the past 43 years, the Orange Book publishing requirements have expanded. More and more information is added to the growing list of drug products. A quick fact. There are a little under 43,000 product listing. This leads us to our next slide. What types of applications are not listed in the Orange Book? Drugs not approved for both safety and effectiveness, that are pre-1938 drugs not subject to pre-marketed clearance procedures, drug products marketed between 1938 and 1962 that have not completed the drug efficacy study implementation process called DESI, unapproved products like compounded products, OTC marketed under monograph, and dietary supplements. And last of all, biological license applications. So how often do we update the Orange Book? The electronic Orange Books have daily updates and twice-a-month updates. The cumulative supplements have monthly updates. The daily updates include generic drug approvals and patents. The update usually appears in the afternoon, excluding weekends and federal holidays. The monthly update usually occurs on the second Friday of each month. For example, April cumulative supplement includes changes in NDA approvals, exclusivity marketing status, and other changes listed on the slide will be published in mid-May. The annual update usually includes any changes to the Orange Book preface, mostly to reflect any statute updates or new publication requirements. What types of Orange Book formats are available? The Orange Book first paper edition was published in 1980. The first Orange Book website was launched in 1997, and the Orange Book edition cumulative supplement was made downloadable in 2005. And to keep up with the times, FDA released the Orange Book Mobile Express app in 2015, which can be downloaded for free on both Android and Apple platforms. On this slide, you will find the Orange Book website. On the Orange Book website, you can search for the Orange Book database. There's also additional information where you can jump directly to the Orange Book publications, supplements, and appendices. You can also look at the Orange Book patent exclusivity information. There's also a link to the additional Orange Book resources and other related guidance and references. This next slide shows you the Orange Book database. Here you can search by the proprietary name, the active ingredient, or the application number. In addition to that, if you want to search by the applicant company, or if you know the dosage form or the route of administration, you can search for that way too on your application. In addition to the drug product, you can search for patent information. You can do that by searching for the patent number, or you can search by newly added patents or delisted patents. On the Orange Book website, you can find a link to the Orange Book publications, supplements, and appendices. In this link, you'll find the Orange Book Annual Edition, the Orange Book Current Cumulative Supplement, Appendix A, Product Name Index, Appendix B, Product Name Sorted by Applicant, Appendix C, Uniform Terms. All these are available as PDF format. The only exception here is the Orange Book Preface, which is available in HTML. If you would like a PDF format of the preface, you can look in the Orange Book Annual Edition. Under Orange Book Patent and Exclusivity Information, we have various resources that is not found in the Orange Book database. The Orange Book Patent Listing Dispute List under Section 314.53F1, the Patent Listing Dispute List contains relevant drug product information and the dispute patent. You can also find a list of patent use codes and definitions. In addition, lists of exclusivity codes and definition, which includes a list of codes with numbers and codes without numbers. And also the frequently asked questions on patent or exclusivity can also be found in this link. Under the Orange Book Patent and Exclusivity Information, you find frequently asked questions on patent and exclusivities. Here are some examples of common questions that we get for exclusivities. What's the difference between patents and exclusivity? What information related to pediatric exclusivity is listed in the Orange Book? And how is the NDA holder notified if the application has received periods of exclusivity? Other examples on patents are, what should an NDA holder submit patents to? On what form should the NDA holder submit their patent on? So please look at this website if you have questions about exclusivity and patents. Under Additional Resource, we also have various resources that is not found in the Orange Book database. You can find the frequently asked questions on the Orange Book on this link. There's also the Orange Book data files, which are compressed zip files, which will allow you to access the downloadable text files for approved drug products, exclusivity, and unexpired patents. More details will be explained in the next slide. In addition, you'll find a link to the addition and deletion for prescription and OTC drug product lists. These lists should be used in conjunction with the most current cumulative supplement and annual edition of the Orange Book. You can also find a link to the reference list drug by and a reference standard list. This link refers to the drug product approved under an abbreviated new drug application that FDA has selected as a reference standard and the associated reference list of drug. The last link you'll see on here is the pre-Hatch-Waxman abbreviated new drug application PANDA in the Orange Book. This is a list of products currently included in the Orange Book and identified as an ANDA in the Orange Book that were approved in the pre-Hatch-Waxman abbreviated new drug application PANDA for safety and effectiveness under 505C of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act prior to the enactment of the Hatch-Waxman amendments. This list includes only those PANDA submitted under Section 505B of the FD&C Act and does not include applications for antibiotic drug products approved under Section 507 of the FD&C Act before the enactment of the Food and Drug Administration Modernization Act of 1997. On this slide, you'll find the Orange Book frequently asked questions. Questions like, how often is the Orange Book updated? How do I obtain the Orange Book? How do I use the electronic Orange Book to find approved generic drugs? Or I want drug information not found on the Orange Book. How do I go about getting it? Please check out this website if you have these common questions. On this slide, I will show you how to convert text files to Excel. All three files are in text format and are available to download each month using the preferred software such as MS Excel. Here is an example of a drug product data conversion using Excel. The product text file are delimited by the tilde symbol. By using the blank workbook in Excel, you can load the information by choosing Data, then from text to CSV. A pop-up will appear. Under the delimiter, you can customize using a tilde symbol and then load the information. Excel will format the information and sort the information as you can see here. The same process can be done for exclusivity and patent text file by using the tilde as a delimiter. On the slide, you can find the related guidance and references in the Orange Book website. This will give you links to the guidance for industry, for Orange Book questions and answers, evaluation of therapeutic equivalence, referencing approved drug products in ANDA submissions, and marketing status notification under Sections 506I of the Federal Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. In addition, you'll find the reference standard data updates to the Orange Book. These updates will help applicants submitting an ANDA to seek approval of a generic drug to identify the RLD, RS, and basis submission for the ANDA. The last link on here is gives you information about the BPCIA Orange Book Transition Edition. This link allows you to access the preface to March 20 of 2020 edition of the Cumulative Supplement, containing information regarding the biological product proof of Section 505 of the FD&C Act as of March 19, 2020, but were subsequently removed from the Orange Book based on the agency's position that these products are no longer listed drugs as of March 23, 2020. So for our first challenge question, the Orange Book data files include approved drug products, exclusivity, and unexpired patents in text and PDF files. A, true, B, false. I'll give you a couple of seconds. So if you answer true, that is correct. The Orange Book data files are available in text and PDF format. Challenge question number 2. What should I do if my drug product is not listed in the Orange Book? A, search the Orange Book database. B, send an email to the Orange Book at fda.hhs.gov. C, search the Orange Book preface. D, B, and C. And E, all the above. I'll give you a few seconds to look this over. So if you answer D, B, and C, that is correct. Try searching the Orange Book preface by reviewing the types of drug products not listed in the Orange Book. You may also contact the Orange Book mailbox if you have additional questions. So the key takeaway is to show folks that the Orange Book identifies drug products approved on the basis of safe and effectiveness by the FDA. The website is accessible at fda.gov/orangebook. The Orange Book website is not just a database, but it holds ample information and resource relating to the Orange Book. Users can access the Orange Book downloadable data files, which is updated monthly and can be converted by Excel. We recommend folks to look at the Orange Book FAQ and preface to answer common questions about the Orange Book. And if you can't find answers to your questions, then you can reach out to us at orangebook@fda.hhs.gov. Thank you for your time, and have a good day.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm Sarah Ibrahim, the Associate Director of Stakeholder and Global Engagement. It is my pleasure presenting to you today the global generic drug supply chain and need for international dialogue. This presentation reflects the views of the author and should not be construed to represent FDA's views or policies. A secure health care system requires the availability of affordable, high-quality medications that are safe and effective. The consequences of falsified or substandard medical products can be life-threatening and detrimental on a global scale. The interests and safety of the public is entrusted to regulatory systems that ensure that only products in legal trade are available and those marketed are safe and effective. Globally, the availability of generic drugs increased competition, leading to lower prices, making healthcare more affordable and accessible for people around the world, encouraging and promoting innovation, improving access to medications, making it possible for people to access life-saving medications at affordable prices, reducing the disease and financial burden, and improving health outcomes, further reducing global healthcare costs. The U.S. healthcare system has saved nearly $2.6 trillion in the last 10 years alone due to the availability of affordable generic and biosimilar products. Now, first generics in particular have an outsized contribution to total savings. Most recently, we published a study that estimates savings associated with new generic drug approvals in 2018, 2019, and 2020. Overall, the first generic approvals accounted for 29% of the total savings over the span of those 3 years. Historically, the production of medications for the U.S. population has been domestically based. However, in recent decades, drug manufacturing has gradually moved out of the United States. This is particularly true for the manufacturers of active pharmaceutical ingredients. Using traditional pharmaceutical manufacturing technology, a U.S.-based company could never offset the labor and cost advantages that countries outside the U.S. can provide. To understand how global our generic drug supply chain is, we identified API manufacturers of marketed ANDAs with active and pending manufacturers to visualize trends in API manufacturing. The percent of ANDAs where an API manufacturer was located in India has consistently increased from 2012 to present. And the percent of ANDAs where an API manufacturer was located in the United States has continuously decreased from 2011 to present. The United States still accounts for the largest share of finished drug formulation manufacturers of marketed ANDAs. The percent of ANDAs where finished drug formulation manufacturer was located in the United States has consistently decreased from 2011 to present, while those manufacturers located in India has consistently increased from 2012 to present. With how global and intricate our generic drug supply chain is, FDA's global presence and engagement secures our supply chain. FDA's regulatory systems ensure the quality and safety of globally produced drugs even before those products are on the market. Generic drugs are just as safe and effective as brand counterparts, and FDA stands behind the rigorous standards and regulatory inspections that go into ensuring the safety and quality of all generic drugs. Globalization has created unique regulatory challenges that require successful collaboration and continuous dialogue. Regulators agree in principle of the importance of global harmonization of pharmaceutical regulations, and aligning divergent regulations creates hurdles that can be mitigated by leveraging ongoing dialogue and collaboration. Harmonization could also take the form of slower convergence, with regulatory bodies gradually aligning their standards and requirements with a vision of regulatory capacity building of the agencies that will be responsible for implementing the harmonized regulations. Achieving harmonization of pharmaceutical regulations requires collaborative efforts, convergence of best practices, regulatory capacity building, effective implementation, and ongoing monitoring and evaluation. Regulatory harmonization is important for the global supply chain, reducing duplication and efficiencies. With consistent quality and safety standards ensured by harmonized regulations that can help ensure that generic drugs are manufactured to consistent quality and safety standards across countries, further protecting patients from substandard or counterfeit drugs. With faster access to safe and effective medications, bringing new generic drugs to the market, which can increase patient access to affordable medications. Harmonized regulations and standards can also help increase transparency and traceability in the supply chain of generic drugs, further preventing distribution of counterfeit or substandard drugs. And of course, improved monitoring and reporting of adverse events that can help identify potential safety concerns quicker
in order for appropriate actions to be taken to protect our patients.
OGD's efforts extend beyond our borders through our international harmonization and collaboration efforts. The necessity of having a clear global policy and strategy led to the establishment of the Global Affairs Program within the Office of Generic Drugs. OGD recognizes the importance of its global presence, and the Office of Generic Drugs established a Global Affairs Program to ensure a strong FDA voice and impact to promote high level of quality culture and standards. We're proactively navigating the landscape and identifying emerging international regulatory changes and challenges. We're engaging proactively with our regulatory counterparts and stakeholders to facilitate FDA's domestic mission of assuring safety, efficacy, and quality of FDA-regulated products. OGD's Global Affairs Program has a number of engagements and initiatives focused on international dialogue that promotes consistency, bringing efficiency in the harmonization process, taking a collective approach and establishing more effective channels of information sharing and communication. We do recognize that regulatory cooperation increases OGD's global presence and enhances OGD's knowledge base, and we continue to support regulatory strengthening, building partnerships, and establishing targeted outreach. Our involvement in the Bioequivalence Working Group for Generics focuses on the implementation and interpretation of bioequivalence requirements, procedures, and tools for the assessment of bioequivalence in generic drug products, facilitating convergence and identifying opportunities for harmonization. We continue our engagement in the Nanomedicine Working Group for Generics, where knowledge sharing between the agencies improves the understanding and capability to effectively regulate these products. On January 31st, 2023, FDA published draft guidance for industry M13A bioequivalence for immediate release solid oral dosage forms, which provides recommendations for conducting bioequivalence studies during development and post-approval phases for orally administered immediate release solid oral dosage forms designed to deliver drugs to the systemic circulation, such as tablets, capsules, granules, powders for oral suspension. Providing harmonized scientific recommendations for conducting BE studies during both development and post-approval phases increases the efficiency of drug development and accelerates the availability of safe and effective orally administered IR solid oral dosage forms. The second in the series, M13B, will describe biowaiver considerations for additional strengths not investigated in BE studies. The third in the series, M13C, will include data analysis and BE assessments for highly variable drugs, drugs with narrow therapeutic index, and complex BE study design and data analysis considerations. OGD Global Affairs Program has announced in its first year two momentous initiatives, the Generic Drug Cluster and the Parallel Scientific Advice. We understand that the pathway to global harmonization starts after regulations have been established and is a rigorous process that requires assessment of regulatory differences as well as scientific and technical negotiations to create bridges across our already established regulatory requirements and expectations. OGD Global Affairs recognizes that prospective harmonization efforts, while regulations are being established, particularly for complex generics, strategically bridges our regulations. The generic drug cluster to date has focused on creating a global dialogue that bridges the gaps for complex generic drug approval, identifying key differences among regulatory agencies regarding the approval of complex generics, aspects hindering approval of complex generics, as well as extensive sharing of case studies and experience with complex generic products that allows a relative consensus regarding approval standards when possible. Overcoming the challenges of complex generic drug development requires close partnership between industry, academia, as well as regulatory authorities. The development of a robust regulatory framework that facilitates pathway to market access as well as patient protection requires investment and research to continue to create that regulatory infrastructure. These research advancements may help generic product applicants rely more on alternative methods, reducing unnecessary human subject exposure, extensive scientific exchange of information, and streamlining the regulatory requirements, as well as clarifying divergent regulations with our global regulatory partners. As an agency, we value global collaboration, and we recognize that with certain products, such as complex generics, that face a more complicated development process, access to multiple markets offers an incentive for companies to move forward with a development program. As we mentioned, the FDA established a multi-country forum, the Generic Drug Cluster, to achieve a common understanding of each member agency's generic drug regulatory requirements and to help increase scientific alignment. The confidential forum for exchange and discussion on policies in development and the scientific basis for the decisions on these policies expand our rich scientific and regulatory knowledge. The cluster to date has focused on current review challenges as well as regulations and guidances under development. The agencies have agreed to share data integrity concerns. We've also expanded data sharing where regulatory requirements vary, as well as generic drug pipeline challenges that we're facing. In addition, we collectively have agreed to focus on certain components where accessibility challenges are due to emerging global regulatory changes. Generic drug pharmaceutical industry and regulatory agencies increasingly seek opportunities to proactively engage in the early stages of product development. Therefore, we established the Parallel Scientific Advice Program for applicants of abbreviated new drug applications for FDA's complex generic drug products and marketing authorization application for EMA's hybrid products, providing a mechanism for experts from two agencies to concurrently engage in the scientific conversation with sponsors on key issues during the development phase of complex generic drug products. In summary, regulatory harmonization, alignment of regulations and standards across different countries reduces trade barriers and creates a more efficient and effective global supply chain for medications, including generic drugs. Harmonization can help to ensure that medications are manufactured to consistent quality and safety standards, which can benefit patients globally. Regulatory authorities, however, must have the necessary competency, capacity, and scientific knowledge to deliver their harmonization mandates effectively. A sound system is critical to ensuring that regulatory authorities can effectively protect the public health. Thank you for the opportunity to share our global efforts with you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamila Harwaka, and I work in CDER's Office of Pharmaceutical Quality in the Office of Quality Surveillance. Our office leverages pharmaceutical intelligence, including information from surveillance inspections, post-market quality defect reports, and laboratory testing data, and we translate this information into insights and actions to help ensure that quality medicines are available to the American public. However, these data points are lagging indicators of quality problems that do not inform on the state of quality at an establishment today or predict what the state of quality might be in the future. Leading indicators of the state of quality, such as quality metrics and quality management maturity, could better inform establishments and regulatory agencies of the risk of quality failures and the likelihood of supply chain disruptions. And this would permit more efficient resource allocation and risk-based inspection planning. CDER is currently developing a quality management maturity program to assess the robustness of quality systems at an establishment and evaluate how adept they are at detecting and mitigating risks before more serious problems occur. For our discussion today, we'll begin by introducing the concept of quality management maturity, and then we'll describe the development of CDER's QMM program. So, quality management maturity. In 2019, a multi-agency report was published on drug shortages, root causes, and potential solutions. One of the underlying root causes identified in the report was the failure of the market to recognize and reward manufacturers for mature quality systems that focus on continuous improvement and the early detection of supply chain issues. Stated differently, the target most manufacturers aim to achieve is compliance, but compliance with product quality requirements does not ensure drug supplies will be available. The pharmaceutical supply chain has become increasingly complex and fragmented, and disruptions on one end can create ripples that are transmitted and magnified across the globe. The COVID-19 public health emergency brought this reality into sharp focus and really shed light on supply chain vulnerabilities. Shortages impacted active pharmaceutical ingredients and finished drugs, but we also witnessed the impact of shortages of primary packaging components, like the shortage of pharmaceutical glass, and disruptions to energy supplies may impede the ability of manufacturing plants to run or to run at full capacity. And we remember the shortage of shipping containers that disrupted the transportation of products and materials worldwide. The development of a rating system to incentivize drug manufacturers to invest in quality management maturity was proposed as a comprehensive and enduring solution to drug shortages. Quality management practices mature as companies expand their focus from compliance with current good manufacturing practice to an emphasis on proactive process and system improvements. Advanced quality systems foster a culture that rewards process and system improvements, increases proactive detection of vulnerabilities, and prevents problems before they occur. Drug manufacturers achieve higher levels of quality management maturity when they successfully integrate business and manufacturing operations with quality practices and technological advancements to optimize product quality, enhance supply chain resiliency, mitigate drug shortages, and drive continual improvement. Quality management maturity can best be thought of as an umbrella program that includes many different processes, practices, and behaviors, such as enhanced pharmaceutical quality systems, quality culture, productivity optimization, customer experience, advanced analytics, sustainable compliance, and quality metrics, among others. Quality excellence is patient-driven, culturally embedded, and built into the processes, mindset, and behaviors of an organization. But the concept of quality management maturity and the benefits of robust quality systems are nothing new. Deming believed that a commitment to quality involved transforming an entire organization. Product quality can be controlled by adequately meeting current good manufacturing practice, or CGMP, requirements, but the concept of total quality management goes beyond controlling product quality. Total quality management includes empowering and engaging employee participation and improved communication with frontline workers, strengthening partnerships with suppliers, improving customer satisfaction by fostering a culture that is patient-focused, and promoting continual improvement, both as an attitude and as a practice. Deming, Crosby, and Feigenbaum have described the cost of quality. It is incorrect to assume that higher quality necessarily translates into higher costs. Understanding that achieving higher quality does require investment of money, materials, manpower, and time, it is important to recognize that poor quality also incurs a cost, from the loss of production, the need to rework or scrap batches, to damage to brand or reputation that can be caused by product failures or product recalls, and the loss of market share are just some examples of the price of nonconformity. In the long run, relying on inspections, audits, and quality control testing to assure quality is costly, and the need to remediate quality failures means further costs that could be saved by building quality into the product and preventing quality defects or failures from occurring in the first place through careful product design, robust quality risk management and knowledge management, and the implementation of robust controls such as advanced statistical process control. Operational excellence and a culture of quality correspond with higher levels of quality management maturity. And higher levels of QMM can reap numerous benefits, such as identifying risks of failure and mitigating them before quality problems and the costs associated with them arise, optimizing product quality and process performance, improving operational efficiencies, reducing costs and reducing waste, increasing customer satisfaction, and generating higher revenues. There have been numerous efforts to improve quality systems across the industry, and a couple of examples are shown on this slide. PDA has developed a quality culture guided assessment tool that establishments can use to assess their quality culture and identify areas to improve. The tool can also be applied to evaluate the quality culture of a supplier or a contract service provider. The ideal state is to ensure a quality mindset and behaviors are embedded into the daily work of all functions, resulting in positive patient outcomes. This tool may also be used in conjunction with other models, such as the University of St. Gallen OPEX model. ISPE has developed the Advancing Pharmaceutical Quality, or APQ program, built on the foundation of ICHQ-10 and further enhanced by cultural excellence and operational excellence principles. The program assists firms to assess their level of quality management maturity by identifying areas for continual improvement. This program also leverages tools from the University of St. Gallen to allow establishments to benchmark their performance. Organizations can leverage this program to ensure a continuous supply of quality medicines to patients. The Dun & Bradstreet Quality Benchmarking Study, performed in collaboration with the University of St. Gallen, demonstrated a positive correlation between higher implementation of quality management maturity practices, such as proactive preventive maintenance, robust quality risk management practices, and advanced process control monitoring, and improved delivery performance, indicating that greater adoption of quality maturity practices may result in more reliable supply chains and less frequent drug shortages. The University of St. Gallen has also done extensive research on operational indicators and metrics that correlate with more effective and efficient pharmaceutical quality systems. CDRH has launched pilots for the Voluntary Improvement Program, which is facilitated through the Medical Device Consortium, MDIC, to evaluate the capability and performance of a medical device manufacturer's practices using third-party appraisals to enhance the quality of medical devices. The assessment evaluates performance of key business processes using a series of integrated best practices detailed in the Information Systems Audit and Control Association Capability Maturity Model Integration System, or the CMMI system. These appraisals promote continuous improvement and organizational excellence among participating sites, resulting in improved process and medical device quality, which ultimately leads to better patient outcomes and increased access for patients. CDER is currently developing a program to assess quality management maturity at drug manufacturing establishments to identify areas for continuous improvement, promote organizational excellence, and robust quality practices across functions to help improve patient access to quality medicines. So for a brief trip down the road to FDA's QMM program, in February of 2020, CDER sponsored and participated in a workshop held by the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy at Duke University on understanding how the public perceives and values pharmaceutical quality. Stakeholders represented at this workshop included patients, healthcare providers, purchasers, pharmacies, and payers. These stakeholders identified 3 key areas for future work and collaboration across the stakeholder community, namely assessing perceptions surrounding quality to improve communication, improving transparency, and developing quality ratings. In 2021, a White House report on building resilient supply chains and the 2022 National Academy of Sciences report on building resilient medical product supply chains recommended the development of a framework and rating system in conjunction with other stakeholders, including industry and academia, to measure an establishment's quality management maturity. And now CDER is actively developing a QMM program. In 2021 and 2022, the FDA launched 2 QMM pilot programs. The pilot programs developed and completed QMM assessments of 7 active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturers and 8 finished drug manufacturing establishments and rated their level of maturity. In April of last year, FDA published a white paper on the QMM program, which described key considerations for developing the program and identified 6 stakeholders that were named the 6 Ps. They are the patients, purchasers, payers, pharmacists, healthcare providers, and pharmaceutical manufacturers. Last May, the FDA held a 2-day workshop on QMM that was open to the public and included presentations by agency representatives, participants from both of the pilot programs, and representatives who shared perspectives from purchasing organizations and pharmacies. A quality benchmarking study demonstrating a positive correlation between robust quality management practices and supply chain resiliency was published in October of last year, and in November, the Pharmaceutical Science and Clinical Pharmacology Advisory Committee, which consisted of members from industry and academia, voted unanimously in support of the development of FDA's QMM program. Early this year, we published a commentary describing the lessons learned from the pilot programs, and stakeholder engagement is and continues to be an essential part of developing CDER's QMM program. Participation in the QMM program will be voluntary. Our development activities are underway, and we're going to discuss each of the 7 concurrent work streams that are shown on the slide here, starting with the assessment and rubric. We're developing the assessment protocol and propose to cover 5 practice areas that are shown in the blue boxes. They are leadership, business continuity, technical excellence, advanced pharmaceutical quality systems, and employee empowerment and engagement. The white boxes beneath show examples of subtopics under each of the practice areas. The assessment will evaluate an establishment's implementation of the guidance in ICHQ 10 and determine how proactive a firm is in promoting continual improvement, technical excellence, and supply chain resiliency, including how well the establishment can predict and adapt to changes in demand and supply. Scores will be developed for each of the 5 practice areas in addition to a score reflecting the overall maturity level of the establishment. To be meaningful, the scores need to be objective measures of an establishment's maturity. To minimize bias in scoring, an algorithm will be developed to compute the scores, and part of the development process will include determining how each practice area will be weighted. This may be influenced by things like the total number of questions in a practice area. The scores will also provide participants in the program with a metric to benchmark their performance against their peers. Many processes need to be developed to operationalize the QMM program. Eligibility criteria will need to be defined. For example, establishments will have to be registered with the agency and produce at least 1 CDER-regulated product. We need to determine if the assessments will be performed by FDA staff or by a third party like CDRH's Voluntary Improvement Program. We need to establish the form of the assessment. For example, will it be conducted entirely remotely or virtually, or will there be an on-site component to the evaluation? What degree of transparency will be appropriate for the program? This will include a determination of what information should be included in the final report and how data will be represented to facilitate benchmarking. What is the shelf life of a QMM assessment? Ideally, we would like to be able to offer reassessments at a frequency that best supports an establishment on their continual improvement journey. But there will be resource constraints, so that's something that we're going to have to balance. Should the assessment protocol be modified for the reassessments to focus the evaluation on areas that were identified for improvement in the previous assessment? What framework will be used to assign the final rating? We also need to determine what incentives, if any, will be offered for participation and whether sector-specific incentives need to be considered. For example, regulatory flexibility for implementing changes to approved applications will not be an incentive for a manufacturer that only makes non-application products. Interestingly, the majority of respondents to a poll during the May 2022 workshop indicated that the greatest benefits of FDA's QMM program were the identification of areas for continuous improvement and better insight into the supply chain, and that these benefits outweighed FDA's incentives or the ability to use the results of their rating for marketing purposes. There have been a number of conversations around transparency with the scores or ratings, and we recognize the concern that making ratings public could disincentivize participation in the program. Different stakeholders will have a different understanding of QMM and what the establishment rating means. With this in mind, we're weighing this decision and are also considering other possible mechanisms for information sharing. For example, manufacturers could exercise their discretion and choose to share their ratings directly with their customers. Communication is a critical part of the development process. We intend to continue to engage with stakeholders as we build the program to ensure that we maximize the benefits to all stakeholders and prevent or minimize the risk for unintended consequences. Communication is also critical for combating misconceptions about the program. For example, it is important to clarify that a QMM assessment is not intended to be used in lieu of or as a surrogate for establishment inspections, and that the QMM assessment does not evaluate compliance with current good manufacturing practice, or CGMP. It's also important to understand that a QMM rating is not a measure of product quality, but is an evaluation of an establishment's behaviors and quality practices. Before the program will launch, a draft guidance will be released. The guidance will address a range of topics including eligibility criteria, incentives for participation, and describe what the components of the program will be, the assessment, the rating, and the report. The draft guidance will also provide another opportunity for public comment on CDER's QMM program. We are working on an IT system to support the QMM program. An IT roadmap has been completed and will be used to help support the design and implementation of our IT system in fiscal years 24 and 25. The IT system will be used to manage registration for the program, verification of eligibility, coordinate scheduling of assessments, and facilitate information exchange, including the final report, in addition to serving as a data storage repository and determining the final rating. Implementation of this program is contingent on securing funding, hiring and training the right staff to perform the assessments, and developing all of the business processes to support the program. What we are able to offer is dependent on obtaining the necessary resources. As our development work continues, we expect to be able to provide additional updates and opportunities for engagement with stakeholders. The QMM program stands to benefit many stakeholders. Patients deserve to have access to high-quality medicines when they need them. Promoting quality management maturity should help reduce the frequency of drug product recalls and drug shortages. Pharmaceutical manufacturers can reap the benefits of improved efficiencies, reduced costs and reduced waste, greater customer satisfaction, and more robust supply chains, in part through informed selection of suppliers and contract sites. Purchasers and payers, pharmacies, and healthcare professionals can benefit from fewer supply chain interruptions and better insight into their supply chains. And finally, regulators will benefit from efficiencies in deploying resources for continued surveillance to support our mission to ensure quality medicines are available to the American public. Looking to the future, to more proactive detection of vulnerabilities before serious problems can occur, it is important to note that QMM is just one piece of the puzzle. FDA is deploying other programs in support of a more proactive approach to regulation, including the Emerging Technology Program and FRAME initiatives to support technological advancements in drug manufacturing, improved understanding of supply chains end-to-end, and international harmonization of regulatory requirements to support drug manufacturing in the global marketplace. Addressing the challenges with supply chain disruptions and drug shortages is a complex problem that will require a multi-pronged solution of which quality management maturity is a part. We look forward to continuing to engage with stakeholders and partners on this QMM journey. No one can do this alone, so let us work together to tackle the larger challenges that we face to assure pharmaceutical quality globally and improve the lives of patients and consumers. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
One and just the PRA staff assigns.
Thanks so much for all of our presenters for all the great presentations. For our final Q&A presentations, please remember to enter your questions in the Q&A chat pod. And if you haven't done it, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. To join our Q&A panel, we welcome Commander Andrew Fine, who's the Senior Advisor in OGD's Office of Safety and Clinical Evaluation, Division of Clinical Review. As part of the division management team, Commander Fine provides clinical, regulatory, and process oversight for generic drug activities in the division. Prior to this role as a Senior Advisor, Commander Fine served as a team leader in the division for 7 years, where he led a team of physicians in their clinical work to support the generic drug program. Prior to joining OGD, Commander Fine spent 4.5 years as a safety reviewer in CDER's Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology, Division of Pharmacovigilance, where he led post-marketing safety efforts for multiple sclerosis drug products. Looks like we have some questions coming in right now. And the first 2 questions are addressed to Sharon Coleman, and here is the first question for Sharon Coleman. Do I have to use the CREATES Act if I want to get product samples for development?
Great question. So the answer is no. Creates is available for people that have been unable to get product samples from brand companies or license holders voluntarily. The use of Creates is not a requirement to obtain samples. And it's worth noting that the FTC has also taken enforcement action against the restricting of access to samples for generic development. And so because of that, in addition to using the pathway that's available under Creates for getting samples, developers that are running into difficulties getting access to samples should consider raising this issue with the FTC as well.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question for Sharon Coleman, and here is the question. Does the Creates Act limit the number of times I can request samples to support my application?
Another great question. And the answer to this one is also no. Creates does not impose limitations on the number of times that an eligible product developer can request samples pursuant to a particular covered product authorization, or on the number of requests an eligible product developer can make for product samples to support their application.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we have a few questions that came in for David Coppersmith. And here is the first question for David Coppersmith. What's the best method of communication to confirm what RLD to rely on for an ANDA application if the RLD reference standard is discontinued?
Thank you for the question. So the RLD, even if it's in the discontinued section, would still remain the basis of submission. If an RLD appears in the discontinued section and FDA has not published in the Federal Register a determination of whether the drug was withdrawn from sale for reasons of safety or effectiveness, the applicant must submit a citizen petition seeking a safety and effectiveness determination for the listed drug at the same time as the ANDA submission. If a citizen petition seeking a safety and effectiveness determination for the listed drug has already been submitted to FDA, the ANDA applicant should then reference that pending citizen petition in its ANDA, and FDA will consider the ANDA to be accompanied by the petition. If in instances where the reference standard is different from the RLD, and the reference standard is in the discontinued section of the Orange Book also, and FDA has not selected a new reference standard for the same drug product, a prospective applicant may ask FDA to select a reference standard by submitting controlled correspondence to the agency. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Do you have another question for David Coppersmith? And here's the question. What if the ANDA was tentatively approved and then the product-specific guidance is revised? Does the ANDA applicant need to perform the BE studies again that are recommended in the product-specific guidance?
So that's a great question. So the bioequivalence recommendations in a PSG represent FDA's thinking on the most accurate, sensitive, and reproducible approach for conducting bioequivalence testing. And an applicant will not receive approval unless bioequivalence is established either consistent with those recommendations or by an alternative approach that satisfies the requirements of the applicable statutes and regulations. One thing to note, though, is that in not all cases are PSGs revised to add additional bioequivalent studies or evidence recommended to support ANDA approval. In many cases, PSGs are revised to provide alternative approaches to currently recommended studies. And when FDA publishes a new or revised PSG and an applicant has already commenced or completed its bioequivalent studies, in certain circumstances, the applicant can request a PSG teleconference to obtain FDA's feedback on the potential impact of that PSG on the applicant's development program. And you can see the draft guidance for industry, PSG meetings between ANDA applicants and FDA for more information on PSG teleconferences, including how to request a teleconference with FDA. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we have a couple of questions that came in for Trung Quoc, and here is the first question. Where would one find expired patents and exclusivities?
Hi, thanks for the question. Expired patents and exclusivity or any other past files, like for instance, annual additions, cumulative supplements, and data files would have to be, you would have to contact the FOIA, which is Freedom of Information Act website to gain that information.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Trong Quoc, and here is the question. Does the Orange Book database website search results that contain more product information than the current monthly cumulative supplement PDF?
Good question. It depends on when the PDF was published and date and time of the website search. Generally, the website may contain more ANDA products information if it has been more than one business day since the publication of the latest monthly cumulative supplement update.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist. We've got a couple of questions that came in for Jamila Harwaka, and here is the first question. Can we contact your, or who would we contact, to have training on quality benchmarking in an organization that legitimately wants to be proactive?
Thank you for that question. So as I mentioned during the presentation, the ISPE APQ program and the PDA culture assessment tool both recommend the University of St. Gallen OpEx model. And we've also been in collaboration with the University of St. Gallen. So I could recommend that you reach out to Dr. Thomas Friedli from the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Jamila Harwaka, and here's the question. Will QMM ratings be used to help determine whether inspections are needed?
Thank you. That's a really great question. So one of the things as part of the development process that we're working on and considering is what kind of incentives could we offer to incentivize participation since it is a voluntary program. And one of the possibilities that we've considered is inspection frequency and how this might impact how frequently a site may be inspected. Another consideration that comes into play could be that sites with higher maturity could have waived pre-approval inspections. So that's certainly one of the possibilities that's under consideration from an incentive standpoint for the program. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our another panelist, we do have some more questions that came in for David Coppersmith. And here is the next question. After a suitability petition is approved by FDA, can any company submit the ANDA with that change, or just the same company that submitted the suitability petition?
So that's a great question. So once a suitability petition has been approved by FDA, anyone can submit an ANDA with that change that was approved in that particular suitability petition. And FDA includes a list of suitability petitions with the status, so either approved, pending, withdrawn, or denied, on the FDA website. And you can also refer to the guidance for industry referencing approved drug products for more information on suitability petitions. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question that came in for David Coppersmith, and here is the question. If a prospective applicant's bioequivalent study for an ANDA fails, can the applicant submit a 505(b)(2) instead of an ANDA?
So no, a 505(b)(2) application in that situation is not appropriate for a proposed drug product. That's a duplicate of a listed drug that fails to demonstrate bioequivalence to that listed drug. Thank you.
Moving on to our next panelists. We do have another question that came in for Trung Quoc. And here is the question. Do you have information about the columns in the data download files?
Thanks for the question. So column definitions can be found in the Orange Book data files, which is, if you go to our Orange Book main website under additional Orange Book resource, you'll find that information there.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist. Got a couple more questions that came in for Jamila Harwaka, and here's the first question. How is this QMM going to work for 503A and B companies, arguably at far more risk to patients than drug manufacturers?
Thank you. This is a very interesting question, in particular because, first of all, 503A firms don't have formal quality systems in the way that a 503B outsourcing facility might, or that drug manufacturers do. And a 503A company is also not subject to CGMP requirements, but certainly could benefit from quality culture and quality type practices. I think ultimately, as we roll out this program, we're going to have to define precisely what the eligibility criteria are to participate. And we may not be able to make the program available to all types of establishments. It'll sort of be a ramp-up process as we build up the resources to be able to do these assessments. But I do think this is a very interesting possibility to consider, and I'm very happy that this question was raised. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a two-part question coming in for Jamila Harwaka, and here's the question. Is the QMM rating a reflection of product quality, and will the QMM program be mandatory?
So I'll answer the second part first. Participation in the QMM program will be voluntary. It is not a mandatory program, and establishments ultimately that are interested in participating in the program will have to register to indicate their interest to participate. As for, does the QMM rating reflect product quality? The answer is no. It's important to understand and distinguish that the QMM rating is not a product quality rating, but it's an establishment rating, and it's reflective of the practices and behaviors at an establishment that go beyond the CGMP requirements. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving back, we did have one last question that came in just recently for David Coppersmith, and here's the question. Can an ANDA be submitted if it contains an excipient that requires clinical investigations to establish the safety of the excipient?
So thank you for that question. So an excipient that requires clinical investigations would not be permitted in an ANDA, but that's something that an applicant could then consider submitting in a 505(b)(2) application. Thank you.
All right, looks like we've worked through all the questions relevant to the presentations that were provided in our last session. We want to give a nice thank you for our panelists and the presenters for the great presentations and answering numerous questions that came in. And we do have a few closing reminders. The recordings will be posted in approximately 7 days. You can certainly check those out at fda.gov/CDER-SBIA. And remember, April the 27th to get the certificates of attendance and also to get your CE for healthcare for physicians, pharmacists, and nurses. So we are looking forward to seeing everyone return tomorrow morning to continue day 2 of GDF 2023. This concludes today's presentations.